And away we go. Okay, this week we're talking about how to respond to the process categories in your Baldrige application. So if you are familiar with the Baldrige criteria, there's this little used to be a Baldrige hamburger, now it's a Baldrige, I don't know, pizza or something like that. But this is kind of how the criteria is set up, if you recall. And there are 5, 6 process categories: leadership, strategy, customers, workforce, operations, and measurement analysis and knowledge management. 6 process categories that you've got to address, and then a big old results section that's going to take up quite a bit of your application. So we're going to be talking about these 6 categories and how to respond to those this week. Got a lot of ground to cover, and so going to move through it pretty quickly and really just give you some strategies. I'm not going to go into every criteria question, but just give you some strategies overall how you might want to address the criteria. We'll talk about results next week, and then the week after next, 2 weeks from today, we'll come back to the process categories and talk about what I really consider to be just a little more difficult concepts. So in that group, and I'll certainly take any suggestions from you that you want to cover, but in that group, going to cover key work systems and processes. That seems to be a tough one to get our arms around sometimes. Core competencies, innovation, and might be a couple others, but those are the 3 bigs that folks just seem to have a little bit of trouble getting their arms around. So we'll cover that in a couple of weeks, and certainly send in any suggestions you have that you want to talk about. Okay, today, cover and process categories. I want to talk about 3 things, and then we'll leave a little time for anything you want to talk about. First one is beginning with the end in mind. And so when I say that, again, if you're familiar with the Baldrige criteria, by the way, new criteria this year. So if you go on the Baldrige website, you can order your copy. We'll have some copies of this. We don't have our supply in yet because they're just coming off the presses, but the Baldrige folks have theirs. You can go on their website. You can download a copy, just like I've done here, for $10, $12. I forget what it is, but something like that. So pretty inexpensive. But new criteria this year. So a couple of changes, not big changes, 1 or 2 things in there, but in the criteria. An examiner team, when they're looking at your application, one of the things that they're going to end up doing is coming up with a score for your different categories. And so this is just a great place to start, in my opinion, when you're thinking about writing. How am I writing? Have I really addressed the things that I want to do? And the way I like to think about it is what scoring range would I like to get? Now, if you're an examiner, been an examiner, you're very familiar with this, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. If you haven't been an examiner or you're new to the criteria, I want to give you enough to point you in the right direction here. So the way this scoring section works, this is for the process scoring guidelines. It's categories 1 through 6, and an examiner team is going to use this to come up with a score and a range for each of your category items. It's then going to have some kind of influence on award levels and things like that, but it's meant to kind of point you to where you're at on your maturity level with the criteria. And so if you'll notice, in these scoring ranges, first of all, there's some ranges. So it starts out 0 to 5, 10 to 25, and so forth, and goes 90 to 100. 90 to 100 is rare territory. Don't see a lot of folks in 90 to 100. Have seen some, but they're pretty darn good. Baldrige recipients kind of come out of these 2 areas here. And so if that's what you're looking for, then that's kind of where you need to start targeting your efforts. But if you'll notice, in each of those ranges, there is an A, a D, an L, and an I, and we're gonna talk about that. But those are the scoring elements that an examiner team is going to look at to evaluate when they're looking at your responses. And so the A is your approach. Did you describe an approach? And I'm going to tell you about how you might want to do that. But then, did you describe an approach or a process, if you want to think about it that way? Did you describe the level of deployment? Did you give me some evidence that you've learned and improved those approaches? And did you help me understand how those approaches that you're describing are aligned and integrated with the things that are important to you and with other approaches? And so that's the ADLI. We're going to come back to that. But notice the language in these descriptions. So at the 0 to 5 range, here an examiner team, if you scored here, they'd be telling you that you don't have any systematic approach to the item requirements. And so again, that's rare. We don't see a lot of folks in that category. So no systematic approach. Well, we get in the 10 to 25 range, and now we got the beginning of a systematic approach to the basic requirements. And I'm going to show you, keep that in mind, basic requirements. So beginning of a systematic approach to the basic requirements. We start moving up. We're still talking about the basic requirements, but an effective systematic approach. Now you're getting a little better. 50 to 65, talking about the overall requirements. So jot that word down, overall. We're gonna talk about what that means, but an effective systematic approach responds to the overall requirements. We get to 70, 85, now we're talking about the multiple requirements, so keep that in mind. Effective systematic approach responds to multiple requirements, and then by the time we get to 90, 100, we're saying, hey, you are fully responsive to the multiple requirements. So again, keep those words in mind, basic, overall, and multiple, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute and what that means. So that's the A. The D, start out with little or no deployment and go all the way to fully deployed without any significant weaknesses or gaps. So that's the range there. Either you got no deployment or you got an approach that is fully deployed. We'll talk about what that means towards the end here. Learning, you got no improvement orientation, moving up to early stages to reacting to problems, moving to beginning of a systematic approach to improvement, and all the way to you've got a fact-based systematic evaluation improvement, organizational learning, innovation. Those are tools that you use. And so I say this to say, hey, when you're writing, and as you're writing, come back to the scoring range and kind of hold up your writing and say, okay, well, if I think I'm in the 50 to 65 range or the 70 to 85 range, that's where I want to be. That's where I think I am as an organization. Does that show up in my writing? So if I want to be in the 70 to 85 range, which again is a pretty high range, don't see a whole lot of folks there, particularly not right away, but if that's where I want to be, that's where I want to end up, that's what I want to communicate to the examiner team, then when I'm looking at my writing, what should come through is that I have effective systematic approaches responsible to the multiple requirements. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Approaches well deployed with no significant gaps. That needs to come through in my writing. I've got a fact-based systematic evaluation and improvement and organizational learning, including innovation. Those are key management tools, meaning that's part of my leadership system are those things. And there's clear refinement, means all those processes that I'm using and describing, I've been around a block a time or two with those, and we've looked at those and improved those. So that's clearly coming out in my response, and that the approach is integrated with my current needs and my future needs. And so somewhere in there, I probably told the examiner team kind of what's happening in the industry and where my organization's headed. And so those approaches need to be integrated with those needs. And so come back to this scoring range every once in a while as you're checking up on your writing and just make sure that that's what's coming through. A lot of times, and I've been in conversations with our applicants and say, hey, here's, you scored in this is where the examiner team scored you in this range, and sometimes they're shocked about that. Sometimes they know that and they're really happy with that, but sometimes they're shocked. And I think if you just hold up your writing and say, hey, did I cover those things when in my writing? Have I written to those things? Have I let the examiner see those things about me? Don't lie. If they're not there, they're not there. But if they are there, have I showed the examiner team what those are? Then I think you're going to be a lot better off whenever you finish up that application. Again, this is kind of a circular thing. I'm going to write. I'm going to come back and check it. I'm going to write. I'm going to come in. And so it's a PDCA in itself. But make sure you come back to that scoring range. Okay. So enough said. Okay. So basic, overall, and multiple requirements. Write that down. We're going to talk about that towards the end, coming back to this scoring range language. Okay, a couple of secrets or tips that I'd pass along to you as you're writing, as you're addressing these categories 1 through 6, leadership and so on. And I'm going to use Mesa's 2012 Baldrige application. And if you were on last week, I told you I'm not using this because I think this is the model of what you ought to do. I'm going to use this just for some examples, but I'm also using this to show you that your application doesn't have to be the best graphic artist display to be effective. In fact, this 2012 application by Mesa, I consider it to be one of the ugliest Baldrige applications ever submitted, and they don't give an award for that, but they should. We'd get it. And so this is one of the ugliest. I just wanted to show you it can be ugly and still be effective. You can do it in Microsoft Word just like we did it, and it can still be effective. So I'm using this as my examples. Okay, so second point. First point, begin with the end in mind. Look at that scoring language and make sure that you are writing to that scoring language, to that scoring range that you want to communicate to the examiner team. Second point is a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so what do I mean by that? In the application, you're going to have to describe an approach. That's the A part of ADLI. And there are probably, I'm going to say, 8 to 10 different processes or systems that the Baldrige criteria is going to ask about that are just better served with a picture, because what you need to demonstrate is that that approach is systematic, meaning that it's got some well-ordered steps, it's repeatable, probably have a little bit of evaluation in there to show how you're getting better at that. And so I think there are some key processes or key systems that Baldrige is looking for. I'm going to call them those Baldrige systems that they describe that are just better served with a picture. And so if you can come up with a picture for those things, or a diagram, a process diagram, then you can speak to that picture in your application, in your commentary, without using a lot of words trying to paint that for the examiner team. So what are those systems, Carrie? Well, I think if I'm just going through the criteria, and I'm probably making you dizzy right now, I apologize. Let me get to category 1, leadership. Okay, starting with leadership, and let me just start with this one. So this is something that we put in our 2012 application. I'm not saying you have to have this. We're going to talk about alignment and integration as part of the scoring criteria here in just a little bit. And for us, this was just I'm going to say a trick, for lack of a better word. This is not something that we've got up on our walls at Mesa. We certainly did for the site visit, but not something that we use. It was just a picture for us to say, hey, this is just our way of doing stuff. And so when we're talking about all these different things, this is the way it all fits together. And we call this the Mesa Way enterprise model. If you can come up with that for your organization, all the better. And all this is just saying, hey, you got leadership at the top, kind of driving it all. And what does leadership do? Well, they plan and communicate and govern and make sure that you got a sustainable organization. For us, there are some key work processes. Those are the things in the middle, and there's some strategic objectives. So our leadership is planning, and we're operating through systems. We're achieving some objectives, and then every once in a while we kind of measure and analyze and improve. And so that just a PDCA cycle with leadership at the top and key work systems. So however you can paint the picture for your organization, I think if you can do that, then all the better. Not a requirement, but I think in terms of something that's just going to help you communicate to the examiner team how all the pieces and parts that you're talking about fit together, then all the better. Okay, so I'd offer that up, and I'm going to show you how we use that as we go through this application. But we started off every category with that and said, hey, I'm about to tell you something, and when I tell you about it, then what we're talking about is this piece of the Mesa Way enterprise model. So other than that, it doesn't mean a whole lot. Okay, pictures that I think you need to have. Number one, I think you need to have a picture of your leadership system. Carrie, what do you mean by leadership system? Okay, well, if you look at item 1.1, category 1, item 1.1 in the criteria, it's asking mostly to tell me the story about how your senior leaders and their personal actions, how do they set direction for the organization, how do they create a focus on customers, how do they communicate, how do they create a high-performance environment, how do they create a sustainable organization, all those things. How do they do those things? And you're going to do those things with probably with different processes or approaches that you're going to talk about in different parts of the criteria. And that's where this gets a little confusing sometimes. But if you can paint that picture for those examiners, and in this case, again, this is one of the ugliest pictures I've ever seen. I think we took the letters out of Star Wars or something like that. But we essentially said, hey, here's what the criteria is asking for. Now, this is older criteria, so it doesn't match up with the new criteria. But how do we set direction? Well, we do it this way. How do we create a high-performance environment? Well, we do it this way. How do we deploy those things? Well, we do it this way. And how do we communicate? Well, we do it this way. All these things then you'll see show up later in the application, but I think you need to paint that picture of what your leadership system is. Now, also, I've used this in the past, used this last week. I'm not going to go through this again because I've already this one up. This is a leadership system, right? This is what leaders do. They set direction, they set strategy, engage your workforce, establish operations or key processes. This is a leadership system. So yours can look like whatever yours needs to look like for your organization. But I think that's one of the pictures that you need to paint for the examiners, and then you're going to speak to that in the application. Okay, so when they're asking you about how do you create a high-performing environment, well, in Figure 1.1-2, look, here's how we do it. I'm showing you right there. I said that in a few words, and you can see that in the picture. Examiners get the feel that, hey, that looks like a pretty systematic approach, and I've even got a feedback loop here to tell me how I learned from that. Okay. So leadership system, write that down as one of the few things I think you need to have a picture about. Okay, we're going to keep going to Category 2, making you dizzy. I know, sorry about that. Category 2, strategic planning. Again, here's our Mesa Way thing that we put in there. We said, okay, we're about to tell you about this strategic planning process. It's a key work process. It's within the leadership system. Right there, you can see it right there. And here's what we do. We operationalize the purpose, the path, and principles. It receives input from the knowledge management system and the performance analysis improvement system. Okay, so all I'm doing is just teeing this up for the examiner team to say, okay, we're going to end up talking about this thing through this entire application. And I'm just telling you, we're about to tell you about this strategic planning thing, and here's how this fits into this Mesa Way. Okay, so strategic planning. You need to have a picture of your strategic planning process, and make sure that that picture addresses the criteria. So in the criteria, it's going to ask you, how do you analyze, the external internal environment? How do you develop the strategy? There's different things that they're asking for inputs. Make sure you have those things in your picture. Again, that's just communicating to the examiner team that, look, I've got a systematic process. It's got repeatable steps, okay? I've got some learning involved in that. So you need a picture of your strategic planning process. So not only the process for developing strategy, but also the process for implementing strategy. And if you can show the connection, because remember that strategic planning process, if you remember strategy over here, strategic planning process, it's going to touch how I develop products and services for my customers, how I engage them, how I identify and develop core competencies and work through my key processes, what I do with my workforce. So that strategic planning process, really need to make sure that you're showing that as the hub for all those things, all those other things that are going to happen. We don't show that here. I wouldn't do this picture the same way today, but it worked back then. Okay, so strategic planning process. Second picture I'd have. Third picture I would have, we're continuing to move along here, I'm making you dizzy, sorry about that, is we're going to come back to that. Okay, now we're in Category 3, customer focus. Again, here's our thing. I'm not going to go through this again, but I'm just going to tell you, we're about to talk about voice of the customer, and here's where it fits in. That's all we're doing there. So if you can do that, I think that just helps your case with the examiners. That way they're not guessing at that stuff. Okay, third picture I think you need to have, voice of the customer processes. Again, this is an ugly one. I wouldn't do this the same way today, but it worked back then. But this is our customer satisfaction survey process. And so however you get feedback from your customers, put that in a picture. What do I do with it? What does it look like? What do I do with it when I get it? Where does it get input? Here's strategic planning process. Maybe it gets input in some different processes for you, but have a picture of that. Other picture I'd have, continuing to move along, is the customer complaint process. Probably, if I were to make a top 10 list of opportunities for improvement that are just low-hanging fruit that somebody probably could have handled with a picture, customer complaint process probably makes it. And so if you've got a complaint process, or even if it's just a kind of an informal process, put it in a picture. Put it in a picture and make it look like it's systematic. Again, I'm not suggesting you ever lie about anything, because someone's going to find that out. But put that in a picture. Make it look systematic. Okay, customer complaint process. Moving right along. Put that on your list. I would suggest. Okay, now we're down here. Now, performance analysis and improvement system ought to be a picture. I would call this something different today. If I write an application today, I would call this my organizational learning and improvement system. And this is going to have my key performance measures, or the things that I look at to kind of tell me how I'm doing. It's going to I want to tell you about my systematic performance reviews. I'm going to tell you about my systematic improvement tools, and I'm going to tell you how I deploy those things. So organizational improvement and organizational learning and improvement system. Ought to have a picture of that. That ought to make your list. Okay. Moving right along. Workforce. Now, we didn't do this in our workforce, and so I would actually suggest that you do. We didn't do this, but another one I would have today, if I were doing this again, you see where I did do it, is this performance management system. We did it in a table back then. I would put this in a picture. So your workforce performance management system, what does that mean? So from my strategic plan, I know I need this many people and these types of skills. So I have that. I've got a human resource plan for that. Based on that, there's some certain competencies and behaviors probably that I need. Every once in a while, maybe I sit down with my folks and evaluate them, or I do, and we develop some improvement opportunities for them. So whatever that workforce performance management system looks like in your organization, I'd have a picture of that. We didn't back here, but today, if I were writing it again, I'd have a picture of that. Okay, moving right along, coming into category 6. Category 6, I would have a picture, and in this case, category 6 actually would be this picture. So I would have a picture of my key work systems or my key work processes. In this picture, we just included all this stuff because we were using it for a reason. But if you just want to think key work systems for us, it would have been these work processes right here. Okay, so I would have a picture of that and how those flow from the strategic plan, how I design those, how I improve those, and what they are. We're going to have a table later on that kind of talks about those and the measures associated with those. But I would have a picture of that for the examiners to let them know what that needs to look like. Depending on your organization, I might also have a supply chain management picture. In this case, we don't, but I would suggest that for your organization if that's a big deal for you. Sometimes it's not, so it's not a big deal. Okay, let me stop right there. So talking about pictures that you might use. Pictures worth 1,000 words. And again, why am I using that picture? Well, I'm using it to communicate to an examiner team that, look, this is a big deal in the Baldrige criteria. And as we move along in the Baldrige criteria, I just want you to know, examiner team, that we've got a systematic process for this thing that the Baldrige criteria says is a big deal. And so a picture really paints that for the examiner team. Okay, questions about pictures? All right, we'll move along. Okay, so if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then as you're answering the criteria, a table is worth almost as much, not quite, almost as much. And so a few areas that I'd suggest that you use a table, okay? Category 1, 1.1, how do I deploy my mission, vision, and values? Let that be a table. Don't write 2 paragraphs on that. You're going to need to save that space. Give me a table for that, okay? Moving right along. When I'm talking about ethical behavior, I might have various approaches for ensuring legal and ethical behavior. Put that in a table. Put that in a table and just tell me how you do it, okay? These comes right out of the criteria. It's going to ask me how I demonstrate commitment, how I promote this in my organizational environment, just give me a table of that. You don't have to describe every process. Now, if that's a big deal for you, if that's a big strength for you, certainly maybe paint the picture of that and tell me that in more words, but it's usually not. This one is more about assessing risk, and so how do you address certain risks? If that is a criteria question for you that's important, then I put that in a table. The other one that I would put in a table is in item 1.2 under the governance. How do you do governance in your organization? There's several bullet points, and I would just, for each of those bullet points, just put that in a table. You know, here's bullet point 1. Here's how we do it. Here's because some of these are hard to weave together in a story. I put that in a table. So my governance processes I put in a table. Okay. Moving right along, societal risks. If you have those, if those are a big deal for you, we've got several. So how do we address those risks? Someone's going to ask us about those, and so it's just easy for us to say, hey, look at figure 1.2-3. That's really how we do it, and so it's pretty clear right there. Not a whole lot of questions. Not too much an examiner team can argue with about that. Ethical and legal things, again, if you can put them in a table, that's great. Moving right along. The other table in category 2, probably 2.2, is strategic objectives. Now, sometimes I see folks leave this out, and I think that's a big mistake. So if you've got a strategic plan, and from that you've got strategic objectives, I'd probably put that in a table, and in that table, I'm going to show you how we did it, and in that table, this is hard to see. I don't know if I can flip that or not. So in that table, this is actually our plan document. So in that table, I would put, what is your strategic objective? How do you measure that? And then what's your projection for that? So in this case, we were able to answer the projection question by having a longer-term measure, out here for this. So this is more of a goal. Kind of had to talk around the projection conversation, but here's our measures for each of these objectives. We just happened at the time to tie in whatever initiative we had associated with that. So strategic objectives, I'd have a table for that, okay? With the measure, how do you measure that, and what is the short-term and long-term projection for that, okay? Now I gotta come back here. Okay, continuing on, category 3, voice of the customer listening methods. You probably have several of those, and I think you want to demonstrate that you do have several of those. So a lot of times surveys are the primary way you do it. Nothing wrong with that, but listen, you're probably out around your customers quite a bit. So just include all of those. It's going to ask about current customers, former customers, potential customers, competitor customers. Just give yourself a table for that and list the ways that you do that. Kind of hard to argue with that if you've got those in a table. Okay, so voice of the customer listening methods, a table I would suggest. Okay, moving right along. That's not one. Communication. No, I got ahead of myself. Okay. Category 4, going to ask you about information that you use and comparatives that you might get. Let that be a table, okay? Put that in the table. So here it's asking about how do we get information to assess the external environment, our competitive environment, voice of the customer. And again, I think this criteria changes a little bit, but it's similar. For those bullet points in category 4, what data and information do you use? Put that in the table. Just list all those different ways. And clearly, you've got multiple approaches for doing that, okay? Do the same thing with comparative data, a table there. So when you get down to what are your key measures? Now, again, I just want to demonstrate to you, this is perhaps the ugliest Baldrige application that's ever been submitted. And you can see here, look at this, column, not even aligned. How do you get away with that? Anyway, they didn't mark that up and send it back to us to redo. So give yourself a table with those key performance measures. Make it look pretty robust. So we've got some strategic plan measures, some things we were doing monthly to look at. We had a people strategic plan. I'll tell you about that in just a little bit, and some operational stuff. So give yourself a table with measures, and then tell me where they're at. If you said this was a big deal for you, where is that result that I'm looking at? Easy for me as an examiner to go back there and say, let me focus on the important ones. You told me this was an important result. because there's going to be quite a few results back there. You told me this was important because it's a strategic plan measure. I'm really going to focus in on that. So give me a table of those and tell me where I'm going to see those back in the results. Okay, table of measures. Okay, moving right along. Going to give me a picture for that. Okay, the IT section, 4.2, some of it might be over in 6 right now, talking about disaster recovery, but it's going to ask you how do you ensure the integrity, timeliness, reliability, etc. of your information. I call it the IT question. Just give yourself a table for that, okay? And just put those bullet points right there. Give yourself a table with those methods. And if you've got a role model approach, certainly describe that. But if you're doing things that are, yeah, a lot of folks are doing those in the industry, just put those in a table for yourself. Okay, moving right along. Tables, communication plan. So how do I communicate with my customers and my employees and my suppliers and so forth? Call it your communication plan. You gotta have a communication plan anyway, but give yourself a communication plan. List all those different ways that you do it, and tell me how frequently they are. Who does it? Who am I talking to? Is it one way, two way, etc.? What's the purpose of that? Now I look like I'm purposefully communicating. In this case, I am. That's probably a good thing to do. So have yourself a purposeful communication plan. Put that in a table. Now I've got multiple ways. We're going to refer back to that quite a bit. Okay, moving right along. Category 5. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Key processes. Okay. Benefits and services that you offer. Put that in a table. Don't try to describe all that in a paragraph. Put that in a table. Tell me what you do. If it's better than anybody else, kind of tell me that right here, so I don't have to guess at that, because I may not know. Maybe everybody's doing this, but if you're the only one that's doing it, then tell me in that table. Performance management system is going to be a picture, and then the other table that I want to make sure that you have is on key processes, category 6.1 probably. Give me those in a table, and I'd suggest a table that, again, this is an ugly one, but it's one that we could point back to and answer a lot of questions. And so if you remember our Mesa Way picture, it had some guiding work systems, some value creation work systems, some enabling work systems, and those were the processes. We'll put those on there. Tell me what the requirements are. Tell me what the sub-processes are underneath that, and give me the measures, because in 7.1-ish, you're going to need to put some results in there. If they relate to other results items, then reference those. But put the reference number in there. Tell me what those are going to be. Also, kind of a nice way for yourself to keep track. Have I included the important things? Because sometimes you get back in results. We're going to talk results next week, and you just start throwing some results in there. But if you come back to your key process, if you come back to your strategic plan, your KPIs, and your key process measures, and just make sure that you're getting those in there, then that's going to go a long way. Those are the important results that you really want to include in there. Okay, so those are the pieces of information that I would handle with a table. Okay, lots of stuff there, and if you didn't get those, email me and say, Kerry, you're going too fast. List those out for me again. Which ones would you put in a table? And I'll tell you those. But make sure you have those in a table. That's the best way to answer those types of questions. Okay? Any questions about that? Let me stop for just a minute and answer any questions about that. All right. I'm wowing you, I can tell. Okay, so let's talk about answering the ADLI stuff, okay? So I said, hey, let's begin with the end in mind, and we're looking at our scoring ranges back here in our Baldrige criteria, and there's process scoring lines. There's a separate set for results. I'm going to talk about results next week, but these are the process guidelines, and the elements are A, D, L, and I, okay? And so how am I going to answer those? So let's start with the A. And remember, I said, hey, write down these words: basic, and overall, and multiple. So if you are have been an examiner before, I'm going to tell you something you should already know. If you haven't been an examiner, then I'm going to help you understand what those are. So if I want to be in the 70 to 85 range or the 50 to 65 range, 70 to 85, I need to address the multiple requirements with some description of an approach. 50 to 65, I need to address the overall requirements with some description of an approach. So let's go back to the criteria itself, and let me find a juicy one here. And how about let's talk strategy development. Okay, words basic, overall, and multiple. So basic, for an examiner, if they're getting trained on this, they'll say, hey, look, if somebody really, you know, they didn't really answer a whole lot of this specifically down here. They just kind of gave you generally the answer to this. You know, it's asking how your organization develops strategic objectives and action plans, implements them. You know, so how do you develop strategy? If you just kind of told me how you develop strategy, you didn't give me a whole lot else in here. Lots of stuff missing. You didn't really tell me about you know, these strategy considerations or your work systems and core competencies or your strategic objectives. You just said, you know, we get together, senior leadership team, we take a retreat. It's a nice place, go play golf and sit in a room for a couple of days and just kick around some stuff, argue and debate, and come out with some goals for the year. Okay, well, you told me how you did it, so you told me how you developed strategy. I mean, you really did it at a basic level, and that's what this level is up here. You just kind of told me how you develop your strategy. So yeah, basic level. I'm probably getting my words mixed up now. Let me back up. So come back down here. Yeah, at a basic level. Okay, thank you. So back to category 2. Okay, so back to category 2. So you told me that at a basic level. At an overall level, you really just answered these bolded questions right here. So you told me how you conduct your strategic planning. We go out to a retreat, we meet for a day or two, debate some things, come out with some goals. You told me how your strategy development process stimulates and incorporates innovation. Okay, you kind of told me generally how that works. You gave me an approach. Told me how you collect and analyze relevant data. So the basic level then is going to be these bolded words right here. And so an examiner team, when they're looking at this and say, hey, did you really tell me basic or overall? They're really evaluating how many of these overall questions did you answer. So if you gave me your planning process, but you really didn't tell me anything about work systems and core competencies, you really didn't tell me anything about strategic objectives, well, you kind of left out half of this, you know, item. I'm kind of leaning more towards the overall than the basic, or the basic than the overall, which basic is just up here. So when you're looking at that scoring range and you're trying to evaluate where did I answer that, you're looking at that. Now the multiples are the kind of the non-bolded questions after that. Now we're getting into the minutia. Now we're really having to get specific in some of this stuff, and so that's all the bolded, the non-bolded words. So those are the multiple criteria. And remember, when we're talking about approaches in the 50 to 65 range, which is a pretty good range, we're talking about these overall levels. At the 70 to 85 range, we're talking about these multiple levels. And again, for an examiner team, it's kind of a feel. And so they're coming back through here and saying, let's see, in their strategic planning process, did they tell me the key process steps? Did they tell me about their planning horizons? And so they're kind of going through, not really as a checklist, but just kind of an overall feel. So if you've put this in a picture, that's why I think this ought to be in a picture, then you can refer back to that picture and really address a lot of this stuff and then clean it up in the commentary. But that's the multiple level. So if you're wanting to get to the 70, 85 range, probably going to need to speak to these multiple levels. So you're coming back through here and looking at your writing and say, did I talk about changes in the regulatory and external business environment? Did I talk about blind spots? Did I talk about all these things? Now, you don't have to address all of them. They're not all that important to you. But that's the level. You want to get to that level of detail in your writing when you're talking about approach, okay? So talking about approach, okay? An approach, again, is you're describing a process. If you don't like the word process, you're repeatable steps. So there are some defined steps that I go through for developing strategy, and I can repeat those, and I can learn from those. Okay, and that's why they're defined. So I could sit back and say, that approach doesn't seem to be giving me the results that I was looking for. Let me go back and walk through that approach and see where I might have some opportunities to improve. So I can learn from that approach. And so that's what you're describing. You're describing repeatable steps. That's why if you can do that with a picture, all the better. If not, you've got to paint that picture with words. So don't give a whole lot of commentary in there that's just not going to be important to describing that approach. Just describe the approach, okay? Okay, so that's approach. Let me stop there before I move on to deployment. Questions about how to talk about approach. I see this happen a lot where folks, they really don't describe an approach, or their picture isn't describing an approach. It might be a nice, pretty diagram, but it really hasn't described that approach that really goes through some repeatable steps and shows that I can learn from that. So questions about how to address approach.
Hey, Kerry, it's Chris.
Yeah.
Sir, a quick question with approach itself. If you have 50-page limitation, and I've seen where others have said you could write about deployment, learning, and integration. If you have a fairly good deployment piece in there, you're learning from it, it's integrated, you don't have to really talk too much about the approach because it's understood. You can't have good deployment or learning without an approach. And with 50-page limitation, it's not possible to describe all your process approaches there. But yeah, you still have examiners that are going to score you on there. Is there a tip there that you could maybe shortcut or describe mostly on the deployment piece, and it's understood it has an approach?
Yeah. So great question. Thanks for asking that. And we'll talk about this when we talk about the D and the L and I. If I'm writing, I'm probably going to lean more to explaining the approach than I am the deployment. So I want you to know that I've got an approach. Now I'm not going to go into every process step, right? But I just want you to know that I've got this approach. I might say that this approach is well deployed, and I'll stop there. And so deployment is a very hard thing to write into an application. So I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time talking about deployment, unless you just want to come out and just say, hey, this is in early stages of deployment. I'm just letting you know that because you're going to find that out later on. But I wouldn't spend a whole lot of real estate doing that. So I would lean more towards describing the approach than I would deployment. And again, here's some balance. I wouldn't go into every process step in detail. But I would describe the approach more so than I would the deployment. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions about approach? Okay. So let's talk about deployment. Chris hit on that, and how would we talk about deployment? So coming back to the scoring ranges, we kind of range from, hey, we just we don't see any deployment, or it's in the early stages of deployment, or it's well deployed, but it might vary in some work units, etc. So generally speaking, it's hard to write in deployment in the application. That's the purpose of a site visit, really, is to catch a lot of the deployment type issues. But you need to refer to deployment in the application to at least give the examiner something to use when they're evaluating and giving you a score. So how would you do that? Well, a couple of ways. One of them, and we did this back in 2006, and I kind of laughed at it back then, but it worked, is that when we wrote in the application about an approach, we'd say it's well deployed and it's gone through multiple cycles of improvement. Now, well deployed is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe it was well deployed, maybe it had some gaps, but that's just, hey, we've got a strategic planning process, or we've got a, let's not use that one, we've got a workforce performance management process. It's well deployed and it's gone through multiple cycles of improvement. So as an examiner, if I'm looking at that, well, you didn't really tell me where it was deployed, but at the same time, I've got to give you some benefit of the doubt, right? Because you told me it was well deployed. I'll find that out when I get there. But in my initial application, at least I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. You told me it's well deployed, and so I'm taking your word for it. You could have some new ones, and so if you said, hey, in 2016, we just developed this innovation management process, and right now it's in early stages of deployment. Well, if an examiner team is going to find that at anyone on site, just go ahead and give that to them. and use some of your real estate. I wouldn't use a lot of real estate for that, but give them one of those every once in a while. And on others, you may not even mention deployment, but in the important ones. So in the ones I said you need to have a picture of, those are important ones. I would give some indication of deployment. I would say, hey, these are well deployed. We've got these, across the organization, and so give them something on deployment for those, because those are going to be the ones that they're going to come back to, and that's going to stick in their minds as the ones that are most important. Okay, so they're going to find out all the truth on site, so don't lie about it in the application, but use your real estate wisely. Deployment is hard to write into an application, and don't spend a whole lot of application real estate trying to address it. Give enough that it looks like that you've at least mentioned it. If you leave it out completely, well, now I don't have anything to go on. I can assume, but now we're going to get into an argument on our examiner team. Give me something to go on. Tell me it's well deployed, early deployment, whatever, and leave it at that. Okay? Questions about deployment? Okay, let's move on to learning. So learning ranges from, well, you just don't have an improvement orientation. You're just reacting to problems. Well, you're moving up to early stages of reacting. You got a general improvement orientation, meaning you said, you know what, we just got a culture of improvement. But I didn't really tell you how we did that or what we did to improve. Moving up to 50 to 65, I got a fact-based systematic evaluation and improvement process, and I've got some organizational learning, including innovation. And that holds true through 70 to 85. Notice these are essentially the same descriptors, although there's some sharing here. And then it's just more prevalent here. Okay, so again, this one is hard to write into an application. So I think a couple of things here. Number one, I think that is why you want to have something like this that has, I would write this differently today, I would paint this picture differently, but has something called your organizational learning and innovation system, whatever you want to call it. Make it criteria based, and say, hey, our stuff flows through this organizational learning and innovation or improvement system. That's how that works. And so, examiner team, I'm showing you that we've got fact-based learning and improvement here. And remember, in category 4, make you dizzy again here. In category 4, and again, we would write this differently today. In category 4, I told you what that is. So I would rename this organizational learning and innovation system, or improvement system, whatever you're comfortable for, and I'm going to tell you what that is. I'm going to tell you that we look at measures, and we go through systematic reviews, and we've got systematic tools that we use to improve, and then we deploy it and share it this way. Maybe I've got some benchmarking in here. We didn't include benchmarking here, but maybe I've got that. So I would wrap that up here, and when you're talking about stuff, refer back to it. So our strategic, or let's say our workforce performance management system, or key work processes, pick one. As we go through our strategic planning process, we evaluate that workforce performance measurement system through our organizational learning and innovation system or set of processes, and that's what. And oh, by the way, so now on occasion, pepper in, particularly on the ones I said you need to have a picture on, pepper in some evidence that they've actually gone through a review. And so I've got, I'll make you dizzy here in just a minute. So I've got an example in our strategic planning one, I think. I might have lied to you. But we peppered in here some examples of planning. So our strategic planning process. We used to We used to just include the three of us in that, and we'd sit around the room. That was back in 2000. 2005, you know, we had a facilitator come in and really give us a systematic approach, and then we invited the next level of leadership down. That happened in 2005. 2008, boy, we just realized that that we weren't staying on top of our blind spots very well, so we added a step for that. And then in 2011, we really just looked at the data we were getting from our external environment and had to clean that up just a little bit. So pepper in some of those examples, not on everything, but particularly on the ones I said you need to have a picture on. Okay, pepper those in. So clearly in my picture, it gets funneled through my organizational learning and innovation system. But I'm also telling you that oh, here it is right here. What we did with our vision, mission and vision. But I'm also telling you, in certain circumstances, or in certain instances, these are some improvements that we've made over time. And here's why we made it. So don't just tell me the improvement. Tell me why you made them. So we didn't just change it from blue to green. We changed it from blue to green because we realized that green really increased the engagement of our workforce if it was painted green instead of blue. And we understood that as we went through our performance measurement, our performance analysis and improvement system. So tell me that. Make that connection for me, okay? Okay, questions about learning, cycles of learning. Don't spend a lot of real estate there, but if I'm going to devote some time to describing stuff, it's going to be the approach and maybe some cycles of learning so that my examiner team can see those in there, okay? Questions about learning. Okay, so the last one then is the I part, and the I is how well those approaches are aligned or integrated with other approaches that you have and with the needs of your organization. So we start with no organizational alignment, and we go all the way to it's well integrated with your current and future organizational needs as identified in response to the organizational criteria. Okay, so I'm going to come back up here, I think, and talk about a couple of good pictures. There's one on improvement and learning, and I'm not seeing the one on integration. Okay, but let's go back to the application. So number one, again, if you can come up with this picture, I'm showing you all these things that I'm talking about, how they integrate with one another. Okay, so in my picture, look, talking about workforce management, go back to that Mesa Way picture that I told you about. Remember, see how that fits in the enabling systems? See how that gets input from here, feeds this, goes into here, okay? That's how that works. So I'm showing you in a picture. All those big ones that I said you need to have a picture of, they're kind of fitting in here, right? Here's my workforce, customer relationship, maybe I got supply chain, so forth. Those are fitting in my overall picture of my organization. Then, this is how we use this. So here again, let me tell you, we're going to talk about this strategic planning process. It's a key work process. It receives input from the knowledge management system and the performance analysis and improvement system. Okay, it's integrated with those things. The output drives operation of an improvement to the key work systems. Okay, so it's connected to those. This picture should illustrate how all these pieces are fitting together to achieve these strategic objectives that I want to get. And again, if you can come up with a picture of that for your organization, you're going to show that alignment and integration. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to write in alignment and integration. If you don't have the picture, you almost have to say, okay, I'm telling you about the workforce performance management system. It gets input from the strategic planning system, and then we use that to drive improvements here in this next. So it's a customer of the upstream process, and it's a supplier to the downstream process. You kind of need to think about it like that. Okay, and so that's the integration and alignment piece that you want to describe in there. So you're thinking about how all those approaches are integrated together. And again, if you get a picture like this, or a picture like this, then it's a little easier to do that because I can just refer back to the picture and tell you, oh, let me tell you, that's where this fits here. See, remember, key processes. They That's how we deliver value to our customers. That's why they're important. And I can talk to you about that. And the examiner team can look at that and say, oh, yeah, I see the alignment and the integration right there. Yeah, great job. Okay, questions about alignment and integration? Okay, I'm coming near the end of our time together. Anything that you wanted to talk about in the process categories that we didn't talk about? Remember, I'm going to hit on those tough concepts: key work systems, core competencies, innovation management in 2 weeks, and I'll have some other ones in there. I might talk about the whole Category 5 and how you need to tie in to Category 2 and so forth, but I'm going to talk about those in a couple of weeks. Those are kind of the advanced topics I consider. But anything related to how to write to the Categories 1 through 6. All right, well, I'm going to leave you there. I recorded this session. I'm going to get this out and get this out on our YouTube channel. Probably access it from our website if you need to. I'll send it out in an email. I'll send the link out to an email if you want to play that back. Play it to your kids tonight. It's entertaining. Get the family around, listen to it, and look at it. If you want to, it might be fun. But anyway, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for making the time. Next week, we're going to talk about results. So kind of the same format, but just talking about how to address the results section. So we're going to talk about those. And in 2 weeks, remember, that's advanced topics. So there's some things that you're struggling with that are just hard for you to answer. Then let's bring it to that session, and we'll get those answered for you. But thanks for again joining me today, and have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye now.